The small hands pressed firmly against his mouth, and Thomas Whitfield froze in his driver's seat, his keys still jangling in his hand. The 8-year-old girl who had somehow gotten into his SUV was leaning over from the back seat, her dark eyes wide with urgency. "Please, Mr. Whitfield, don't say anything. They have one of those listening things in here," Grace Washington whispered, her voice barely audible. "The bad people who work for you put it here yesterday when you were at church." Thomas's mind raced as he looked at this child he had never seen before. He owned 14 Whitfield home and hardware stores across 3 states, employed over 2,000 people, and had built his business on Christian principles for 23 years. But right now, none of that mattered as much as understanding why this little girl was in his car at 7:30 on a Monday morning. Grace slowly removed her hands from his mouth, putting a finger to her own lips. She pulled out a piece of paper from her worn backpack and wrote, "They're watching from the blue van across the street. My Sunday school teacher, Mrs. Patterson, is your bookkeeper's sister. I heard them talking after church yesterday about stealing from you and blaming it on you." Thomas felt his blood run cold. Patricia Patterson was indeed his head bookkeeper, and her sister Angela taught at First Baptist, where he attended. But how could this child know about any conspiracy? And more importantly, why would she risk herself to warn him? He pulled out his phone and typed a message, showing it to her. "Who are you? How do you know this?" Grace typed back, "My mama cleans offices at night. I stay with her sometimes when Grandma can't watch me. I was hiding in the supply closet reading my Bible when 3 of your managers came in. They didn't know I was there." Thomas's hands trembled slightly as he started the car, trying to act natural. Through his rearview mirror, he could indeed see a blue van parked across from his flagship store. He had never noticed it before, but now it seemed ominously conspicuous. As he drove away slowly, Grace stayed low in the back seat. Once they were several blocks away, she finally spoke aloud, though still quietly. "Mr. Whitfield, they're planning something really bad for tomorrow. They said you trust everyone too much because you're a Christian, and that makes you an easy target." Thomas pulled into a small coffee shop parking lot, his mind reeling. "Grace, this is very serious. Can you tell me exactly what you heard?" The little girl's face scrunched up in concentration, and she pulled out a small notebook covered in stickers of crosses and doves. "I wrote it all down, just like my mama taught me. She says always document everything, because poor folks' words don't count for much without proof." Thomas read through the neat, careful handwriting, and his heart sank with each line. 3 of his most trusted managers, Robert Brennan, Carl Hutchinson, and surprisingly Patricia Patterson, had been skimming from the stores for 5 years. But that wasn't the worst part. They were planning to frame him for embezzlement and tax fraud, with falsified documents already prepared. "Tomorrow morning," Grace continued, "they're going to call the FBI and news stations. They have fake papers that make it look like you've been stealing money meant for charity and not paying taxes. Mr. Brennan said you'd be in jail by tomorrow night." Thomas closed his eyes, offering a quick prayer for wisdom. When he opened them, Grace was watching him intently. "You're praying, aren't you? My grandma says that's the first thing to do when trouble comes." "Your grandmother sounds like a wise woman," Thomas replied, managing a small smile despite the gravity of the situation. "Grace, what's your mother's name?" "Dorothy Washington. She's been cleaning your main store for 6 years, but you probably don't know her. She works the overnight shift." Thomas actually did know Dorothy, though not well. She was a quiet, dignified woman who always left a small crosspin on her cleaning cart. He had spoken to her a few times during late inventory nights, and she had always been respectful but distant. "Why didn't your mother come to tell me herself?" he asked gently. Grace's eyes filled with tears. "She's scared, Mr. Whitfield. She's undocumented. She came here from Haiti when I was a baby, and she's been trying to get her papers right, but it costs so much money. If she gets involved with police or anything official, they might send her away, and then what would happen to me?" Thomas felt a wave of compassion wash over him. This child and her mother had risked everything to warn him. "Grace, I promise you, nothing bad will happen to your mother because of this. You have my word. Mama says promises from rich people are like soap bubbles, pretty but they pop real quick, Grace said matter-of-factly, but there was hope in her eyes. Thomas pulled out his phone and called the only person he knew he could trust completely, his lawyer and fellow church member, Samuel Thornton. Sam, I need you to meet me at the coffee shop on Riverside and bring your recording equipment. We have a situation that requires immediate attention. While they waited, Grace shared more details. Mr. Brennan has been using your delivery trucks to move stuff that's not hardware supplies. I saw boxes with different labels going out late at night. And Mrs. Patterson, she's been changing numbers in the computer. She showed Mr. Hutchinson how she could make money disappear and reappear wherever she wanted. How long have you been watching all this? Thomas asked, amazed at the child's observational skills. Since last summer, Mama got really sick, and I had to stay with her at work every night for 2 months. I learned to be really quiet and invisible. People don't notice kids, especially poor kids who are just sitting in a corner reading. Samuel arrived within 20 minutes, his expression grave as Thomas quickly explained the situation. The lawyer, a tall man with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, knelt down to Grace's level. Young lady, you're very brave. Would you be willing to tell me everything you told Mr. Whitfield and let me record it? Grace looked at Thomas, who nodded encouragingly. Will my mama be safe? Samuel smiled gently. I'm going to make sure both you and your mother are protected. In fact, I think we can help with her immigration status too. There are provisions for people who assist in uncovering major crimes. Over the next hour, Grace recounted everything she had witnessed. Her testimony was remarkably detailed. Dates, times, partial conversations, even descriptions of boxes and documents she had seen. It was clear that this child had an exceptional memory and had been paying careful attention. There's something else, Grace said hesitantly. I heard Mr. Brennan on the phone with someone last week. He said, after we get rid of the Jesus freak, we can run this business the right way. He used a bad word before Jesus, but I won't repeat it. Thomas felt a familiar sting. He had always been open about his faith, holding optional prayer meetings for employees, closing on Sundays despite the loss of revenue, and donating 10% of profits to local charities. He knew some people mocked him for it, but hearing it from trusted employees hurt deeply. Samuel stood up, his face set with determination. Thomas, we need to act fast. With Grace's testimony and some quick investigation, we can turn this around on them. But we need evidence beyond her word. I can help with that, Grace piped up. Mama's working tonight. I could hide in the closet again with a phone and record them. They have a meeting every Monday night at 10 o'clock. Absolutely not, Thomas said firmly. I won't put you in danger. But I won't be in danger, Grace insisted. They never check that closet. It's full of old Christmas decorations. I've hidden there dozens of times, and I know how to be really, really quiet. Samuel and Thomas exchanged glances. It was risky, but it might be their only chance to get concrete evidence before tomorrow's planned frame-up. I have a better idea, Samuel said. We'll have professional investigators handle the recording, but Grace, you've given us enough information to know exactly where to place surveillance equipment. That afternoon, while Thomas maintained his normal routine to avoid suspicion, Samuel worked with a private investigation firm that specialized in corporate fraud. By 5 o'clock, they had legally placed recording devices in Thomas's office and the conference room where the conspirators met. Thomas insisted on driving Grace home to explain the situation to her mother. They pulled up to a small apartment building in a struggling neighborhood, a far cry from Thomas's suburban home. Dorothy Washington answered the door, her face immediately creasing with worry when she saw her daughter with her employer. She was a petite woman with the same intelligent eyes as her daughter, though hers were shadowed with exhaustion and fear. Mr. Whitfield, I'm so sorry if Grace has been any trouble. Mrs. Washington, your daughter may have just saved my business and my reputation, Thomas interrupted gently. "May I come in? We need to talk." The apartment was small but immaculate, with a prominent cross on the wall and a well-worn Bible on the coffee table. Dorothy listened in growing alarm as Thomas explained what Grace had discovered. "I told her not to get involved," Dorothy whispered, pulling Grace close. "I knew something was wrong at the store, but I couldn't. My situation—" "I understand completely," Thomas assured her, "and I want you to know that my lawyer is already working on your immigration case. You've been here legally on an expired visa, working, paying taxes, raising this remarkable child. We're going to make this right." Dorothy's eyes filled with tears. "Why would you help us? We're nobody to you." Thomas thought for a moment, then said, "There's a verse in Hebrews that says, 'Do not forget to entertain strangers, for by doing so, some have entertained angels unawares.' I think God sent Grace as an angel to help me, and now it's my turn to help you." That evening, Thomas attended the Monday night prayer meeting at his church as usual, though his mind was racing. Pastor Williams noticed his distraction and pulled him aside afterward. "Something weighing on you, Thomas?" Thomas gave him an abbreviated version of the day's events. The pastor's eyes widened. "And this all came to light because of a child?" "An extraordinary child," Thomas confirmed. "Pastor, I've been thinking. I built my business on Christian principles, but somewhere along the way, I stopped really seeing the people around me. Dorothy has been cleaning my store for 6 years, and I barely knew her name. How many other employees are struggling while I sit comfortably in my office?" Pastor Williams placed a hand on Thomas's shoulder. "Sometimes God uses trials to open our eyes to what we've been missing. This situation with your managers is terrible, but perhaps something beautiful will come from it." At 10 o'clock that night, Thomas sat in his home office with Samuel and 2 private investigators, listening through a secure connection as his 3 managers met in the store's conference room. What they heard was damning. "By noon tomorrow, Whitfield will be in federal custody," Robert Brennan's voice came through clearly. "I've got a contact at Channel 7 who's ready to run the story as soon as the FBI shows up." "The doctored books are perfect," Patricia Patterson added. 5 years of skimming, all traced back to his personal accounts. The righteous Christian businessman stealing from his own charity fund. It's almost poetic. "What about the side business?" Carl Hutchinson asked. "Once Whitfield's gone, we can expand the operation. I've got buyers lined up for twice what we're moving now." Thomas's stomach turned as they detailed their illegal operation, using his delivery trucks to transport stolen goods, laundering money through the stores, and their plans to expand once he was imprisoned. "The best part," Brennan laughed, "is that Whitfield's so trusting he signed every document we put in front of him. His signature is on everything. Even if he claims innocence, who's going to believe him?" Samuel nodded to the investigators, who confirmed they had everything recorded. They also had photographic evidence of the illegal goods in the warehouse, documents Patricia had falsified, and a clear trail of the real embezzlement. "We need to move tonight," Samuel said. "By morning we'll have federal agents here, but they'll be arresting the right people." Thomas spent the rest of the night in prayer and preparation. At 3 in the morning, his phone rang. It was Dorothy Washington. "Mr. Whitfield, I'm at the store cleaning, and there are men here loading trucks. This isn't normal." "Dorothy, get out of there right now," Thomas said urgently. "Take Grace and go to the church. Pastor Williams will meet you there." But Dorothy's voice was firm. "No, sir. I'm going to finish my job. If they're doing wrong in God's house of business, I'm going to be a witness. Grace is safe with my neighbor." Before Thomas could protest, she hung up. He immediately called the FBI contact Samuel had reached, explaining the situation. Within 30 minutes, federal agents had surrounded the store. The arrests happened just as the sun was rising. Robert Brennan, Carl Hutchinson, and Patricia Patterson were taken into custody, along with 6 other employees involved in the conspiracy. The evidence was overwhelming: recorded conversations, falsified documents, and a warehouse full of stolen goods. But the real drama came when the media arrived, expecting to cover Thomas's arrest. Instead, they found a completely different story. Channel 7's reporter, who had been fed false information by Brennan, looked particularly embarrassed as she had to quickly pivot her coverage. Thomas stood in front of his store, giving a brief statement. "I want to thank the brave individuals who came forward to expose this corruption, particularly a young girl whose courage reminded me of what truly matters. This business was built on Christian values, and while some tried to exploit that foundation of trust, it's that same faith that brought the truth to light." Later that morning, Thomas met with all his employees. The main store's meeting room was packed as he addressed them with unusual candor. "I failed you," he began, surprising everyone. "I created a business, but not a community. I preached Christian values, but didn't see the struggles of the people right in front of me. Dorothy Washington has cleaned these floors for 6 years, working nights to support her daughter, and I never once asked about her life, her dreams, her challenges." He paused, looking at the faces before him. "Starting today, things change. We're implementing a new employee assistance program. Anyone facing immigration issues, healthcare problems, housing instability, we're going to help. Not as charity, but as family, because that's what we should be." The room erupted in surprised murmurs. Thomas continued, "We're also raising the minimum wage for all positions to $22 an hour, implementing profit sharing, and creating an education fund for employees' children." From the back of the room, someone started clapping. Soon, the entire room was applauding, many with tears in their eyes. That afternoon, Thomas visited Grace's school, having arranged with the principal to speak to her class about honesty and courage. Grace beamed with pride as her classmates learned that she had helped stop bad people from doing wrong things. After the presentation, Grace pulled Thomas aside. "Mr. Whitfield, can I tell you a secret?" "Of course." "Last Sunday in church, I prayed really hard for my mama to get her papers fixed. I think God answered my prayer, but not the way I expected." Thomas knelt down to her level. "Sometimes God's answers are bigger than our prayers, Grace. You asked for help for your mother, and God used you to help many people." Ooh. 2 weeks later, at the federal courthouse, Robert Brennan, Carl Hutchinson, and Patricia Patterson were formally charged with embezzlement, fraud, conspiracy, and operating an illegal trafficking ring. The investigation revealed they had stolen over $3 million and used the business to move over $10 million in stolen goods. During Patricia Patterson's testimony, she broke down, crying. "I got greedy. Mr. Whitfield paid us well, treated us fairly, but I wanted more. I convinced myself he was a naive fool who deserved to be taken advantage of because of his religious beliefs." The prosecutor asked, "Did you ever consider the impact on the charitable organizations that would lose funding?" Patricia couldn't answer, sobbing into her hands. Meanwhile, Samuel Thornton had fast-tracked Dorothy's immigration case. Given her assistance in uncovering a major federal crime, she qualified for a U visa, providing her a path to legal residency. The day Dorothy received her work permit, Thomas offered her a new position, head of community outreach for all Whitfield stores. "You've been invisible in my company for too long. It's time to put your insight and compassion to work helping others." Dorothy was speechless for a moment, then said, "Mr. Whitfield, I don't have a degree. I don't have experience in that kind of work." "You have something more valuable," Thomas replied. "You understand struggle. You raised an exceptional daughter while working nights, and you stood up for what was right when it would have been easier to stay quiet. That's exactly the kind of person I need." 6 months later, Whitfield Home and Hardware had become a case study in ethical business practices. Sales had increased by 30%, employee turnover had dropped to nearly zero, and the company had won several awards for its community programs. Grace had become something of a local celebrity, though she remained humble. Her story had inspired other children to speak up when they witnessed wrongdoing, and she had been invited to speak at several schools and churches. One evening, Thomas invited Dorothy and Grace to dinner at his home. His wife, Margaret, had prepared a feast, and his own children, both in college, had come home to meet the girl who had saved their father's business. During dinner, Grace asked, "Mr. Whitfield, do you ever feel bad for Mr. Brennan and the others? They're in jail now." Thomas thought carefully before answering. "I feel sad for them, Grace. They had good jobs, opportunities, but they let greed control them. I pray for them every night." "My grandma says we should pray for our enemies," Grace said. "It's really hard sometimes." "Yes, it is," Thomas agreed. "But that's what makes us different. That's what our faith calls us to do." Margaret added, "Thomas has actually set up a fund for the families of the employees who were arrested. Their children didn't do anything wrong, and they shouldn't suffer for their parents' mistakes." Dorothy's eyes widened. "You're helping the families of the people who tried to destroy you. Love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you," Thomas quoted. "It's not easy, but it's right." As the evening continued, Thomas's son David asked Grace, "What made you so brave? I mean, you're just a kid, and you stood up to dangerous adults." Grace thought for a moment, then said, "My Sunday school teacher says that David was just a kid when he fought Goliath. And Joseph was young when his brothers sold him, but he still did the right thing later. Being young doesn't mean you can't be brave." "But weren't you scared?" David's sister Rebecca asked. "Really scared," Grace admitted. "But my mama always says, fear is just faith that hasn't said its prayers yet. So I prayed, and then I wasn't as scared anymore." Later, as they were leaving, Dorothy pulled Thomas aside. "I need to tell you something. The night before Grace warned you, she had a dream. She said an angel told her to help the sad man who would be in trouble. She described you perfectly, even though she'd never met you." Thomas felt goosebumps rise on his arms. "Do you believe it was really an angel?" Dorothy smiled. "I believe God speaks to children in ways we adults have forgotten how to hear. Grace has always been special that way." As they watched Grace skipping to their car, now a much newer model that Thomas had helped them purchase at cost, he reflected on how much had changed. A year later, at the company's annual celebration, Thomas stood before a crowd of employees, community leaders, and media. Grace was there in a new dress, sitting in the front row with her mother, who now wore a business suit as she had become one of the company's most valuable executives. "A year ago," Thomas began, "I thought I was a successful businessman. I had stores, profits, respect. But I was blind to what was happening in my own company, and more importantly, to the people who made that success possible." He looked directly at Grace. "Then God sent me an unlikely prophet, an 8-year-old girl who had the courage to speak truth to power. Grace Washington didn't just save my business. She saved my soul from the complacency that wealth and comfort can bring." The audience applauded as Grace blushed, hiding her face in her mother's shoulder. Thomas continued, "We've learned that a business built on Christian principles must be more than words on a mission statement. It must be lived out in how we treat every employee, from the CEO to the night janitor. It means seeing Christ in everyone who walks through our doors." After the celebration, Pastor Williams approached Thomas. "You've built something remarkable here, Thomas. Not just a business, but a ministry." "It almost took losing everything to understand what I really had," Thomas replied. "Pride is subtle, Pastor. I thought because I went to church and tithed and followed the rules, I was a good Christian businessman. But I was distant from the very people God called me to serve. And now I understand that success isn't measured in profit margins, but in lives touched, families supported, communities strengthened. Grace taught me that God often speaks through the least expected voices. We just have to be humble enough to listen." 3 years passed. Grace, now 11, had become an excellent student, her education fully funded by the Whitfield Family Foundation. She still visited the stores regularly, having become an unofficial morale officer, remembering employees' names and birthdays with remarkable accuracy. Dorothy had risen to become Vice President of Human Resources for all Whitfield stores, implementing programs that had become models for other businesses. Her journey from undocumented night janitor to executive had inspired a book and a documentary. One day, Thomas received a letter from federal prison. It was from Robert Brennan. "Thomas, I've had 3 years to think about what I did. I betrayed not just your trust, but my own soul. I mocked your faith while my own life was empty of meaning. I've started attending chapel here, trying to understand what you have that I was so desperate to destroy. I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted you to know that your response to our betrayal, helping our families, praying for us, has changed me. Maybe there's hope for someone like me after all." Thomas read the letter to Dorothy and Grace in his office. Grace, now more mature but still possessing that remarkable spirit, said, "You should visit him, Mr. Whitfield." "Why do you think that, Grace?" "Because that's what Jesus would do. He didn't just forgive people from far away. He went to them." 2 weeks later, Thomas sat across from Robert Brennan in the prison visiting room. The man who had tried to destroy him looked older, humbled, his previous arrogance replaced with genuine remorse. "I don't deserve your forgiveness," Robert began. "None of us deserve forgiveness," Thomas replied. "That's what makes it grace." They talked for an hour about faith, redemption, and second chances. Before leaving, Thomas said, "When you get out, if you want to work honestly, there will be a job waiting for you. Not in management, but honest work at honest pay." Robert's eyes filled with tears. "Why would you do that?" "Because someone gave me a second chance when I didn't deserve it. And because a little girl taught me that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's doing what's right, despite the fear." 5 years after that fateful morning, when Grace had covered his mouth in warning, Thomas stood at her high school graduation. She was valedictorian, headed to college on a full scholarship, planning to study law to help other immigrant families. In her graduation speech, Grace said, "5 years ago, I was a scared little girl hiding in a supply closet. But I learned that one voice, even a small one, can make a difference if it speaks the truth. Mr. Thomas Whitfield taught me that success without service is empty, and that true leadership means lifting others as you climb." After the ceremony, Grace found Thomas in the crowd, now taller than when they first met, but still possessing those same intelligent, compassionate eyes. She hugged him tightly. "Thank you for keeping your promise," she said. "Thank you for seeing us when we were invisible. Thank you for saving me when I didn't know I needed saving," Thomas replied, his voice thick with emotion. Dorothy joined them, tears streaming down her face. "God works in mysterious ways," she said. "Oh, who would have thought that my little girl hiding in a closet would change so many lives?" As they stood there, the millionaire businessman, the former janitor turned executive, and the young woman headed for a bright future, other families gathered around them. Employees whose lives had been transformed, children who had received scholarships, former inmates who had been given second chances. Thomas looked at this unlikely family that had formed around shared values and mutual respect. His business had thrived beyond his wildest dreams, but more importantly, it had become a beacon of hope in the community. Later that evening, at Grace's graduation party, Pastor Williams pulled Thomas aside. "You know, when this all started, you thought you were just dealing with business betrayal. And now I see it was God's way of breaking down my walls," Thomas replied. "I had built a successful business, but failed to build meaningful relationships. I practiced charity, but not true compassion. Grace didn't just save my business. She saved me from becoming the kind of Christian who follows rules, but misses the heart of the gospel." As the party continued, Thomas watched Grace interact with guests, confident, articulate, compassionate. She had grown from the scared little girl in his back seat to a young woman who would undoubtedly change the world. Carl Hutchinson and Patricia Patterson had been released from prison early for good behavior. Both had reached out to Thomas, expressing remorse and gratitude for his support of their families during their incarceration. Patricia now worked at a non-profit, helping formerly incarcerated women reintegrate into society. Carl had moved to another state to start fresh, but sent regular updates on his progress in rebuilding his life honestly. Robert Brennan was still serving his sentence, but had become a chapel leader in prison, helping other inmates find faith and hope. His letters to Thomas had evolved from apologies to testimonies of transformation. As the sun set on the graduation party, Grace approached Thomas one more time. "Mr. Whitfield, can I ask you something?" "Anything, Grace." Do you think God plans everything? Like, did he plan for me to be in that closet that night?" Thomas considered the question carefully. "I think God can use any situation for good if we're willing to listen and act. You could have stayed quiet that night, stayed safe, but you chose courage. That choice changed everything. My mama says God doesn't always calm the storm, but he does calm his child in the storm. Your mother is a wise woman, and she raised a wise daughter." Now, as the party wound down, Thomas stood with Margaret watching their community, once strangers, now family, celebrate together. His wife squeezed his hand. "You're a different man than you were 5 years ago. Better, I hope." "Better," she confirmed. "Humbler, kinder, more present. That little girl didn't just save your business, Thomas. She helped you find your soul again." 10 years after that pivotal morning, Whitfield Home and Hardware had become a nationally recognized model for ethical business practices. They had expanded to 43 stores across 7 states, each one operated on the same principles of fair wages, employee support, and community engagement. Grace Washington, Esquire, had graduated from law school and started a practice specializing in immigration law and workers' rights. Her first client was her mother, though Dorothy hardly needed legal services anymore as a naturalized citizen and successful executive. At the 10th anniversary celebration of what employees had come to call the Revelation, the day Grace had exposed the conspiracy, Thomas stood before a crowd of over 3,000 employees and community members. 10 years ago, I thought I knew what success looked like," he began. "I measured it in profit margins and market share. But an 8-year-old girl taught me that true success is measured in lives touched, families supported, and communities strengthened." He paused, looking at Grace in the front row, now a confident professional, but still wearing the small cross necklace she'd worn since childhood. "Grace Washington reminded me of a fundamental truth, that every person has value, every voice matters, and that God often speaks through the most unexpected messengers. She taught me that Christianity isn't just about Sunday worship, but about Monday through Saturday service." The crowd erupted in applause. Grace stood, and the ovation intensified. She made her way to the stage, and Thomas handed her the microphone. "10 years ago, I was just a scared kid who spoke up," Grace said, her voice strong and clear. "But Mr. Whitfield showed me that speaking truth is only the beginning. What matters is what we do with that truth." He could have simply stopped the conspiracy and moved on. Instead, he used it as a catalyst for transformation, not just of his business, but of thousands of lives. She looked out at the crowd, many faces familiar from years of community involvement. "This company proves that businesses can be both profitable and prophetic, successful and servant-like. That's the real miracle here." And as the celebration continued, Thomas found himself in quiet conversation with Robert Brennan, who had been released 2 years earlier and now worked in the warehouse of one of the stores. He had proven himself trustworthy, working hard and mentoring younger employees about the dangers of greed and the power of redemption. "I spent so many years thinking your faith made you weak," Robert said quietly. "Now I understand it was your greatest strength. It allowed you to forgive when I deserved punishment, to help when I deserved abandonment. We all need forgiveness, Robert. I've made my own mistakes, just different ones. But you never tried to destroy someone out of jealousy and greed." "No, but I was guilty of pride and blindness. I built walls between myself and the people who needed me most. In some ways, that's just as destructive." As the evening progressed, Dorothy took the stage to announce a new initiative, the Grace Washington Scholarship Fund, which would provide full college education for children of all Whitfield employees. "My daughter taught us all that courage has no age limit," Dorothy said, tears in her eyes. "This fund ensures that every child in our Whitfield family has the chance to be heard, to learn, and to lead." The announcement was met with thunderous applause. Grace was visibly moved, wiping tears from her eyes as employees approached to thank her. Later, as the event wound down, Thomas stood outside looking at the stars. Pastor Williams, now in his 70s, joined him. "Quite a journey from that morning 10 years ago," the pastor observed. "Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if Grace hadn't been in that closet," Thomas mused. "But she was, and you listened. That's what matters. I almost didn't, you know. For a split second, when I saw her in my car, my first instinct was irritation. This child was in my space, disrupting my morning routine. But you listened. By God's grace, yes. And that made all the difference." As they stood in comfortable silence, Grace approached with her mother. "Mr. Whitfield, we wanted to thank you again, not just for everything you've done, but for who you've become." Thomas smiled. "I should thank you. You showed me that faith without works is dead, that seeing Christ in others means actually seeing others, period." Dorothy added, "You know, that night when Grace told me what she'd done, I was terrified. I thought we'd lose everything." "Instead, you gained everything," Margaret said, joining the group. "We all did," Thomas corrected. "We gained a family." As the years continued to pass, the story of Grace and Thomas became legendary in business schools and churches alike. It was a testament to the power of truth, the strength of faith, and the importance of listening to unexpected voices. Grace went on to argue cases before the Supreme Court, always wearing the small cross necklace that reminded her of her roots. Dorothy became a nationally recognized speaker on corporate ethics and servant leadership. And Thomas, well into his 70s, continued to run his business with the same principles Grace had helped him rediscover. On his retirement day, Thomas stood before his employees one last time. Grace, now with children of her own, stood beside him. "I want to leave you with one thought," Thomas said. "Success is not about what you build for yourself, but what you build for others. A little girl once told me that fear is just faith that hasn't said its prayers yet. So pray, have faith, and never be too proud to listen to unexpected voices. They might just save your soul." As he stepped down, the leadership team he had cultivated over the years, people who understood that business could be ministry, that profit and principle weren't mutually exclusive, took the reins. The company would continue to thrive, but more importantly, it would continue to serve. That evening, at his retirement party, Thomas sat with Grace and her family. Her daughter, about 8 years old, the same age Grace had been during that fateful morning, looked up at him with familiar, intelligent eyes. "Grandpa Thomas," she said, for that's what Grace's children called him, "Mama says you and her changed the world together." "Your mama changed the world," Thomas corrected gently. "I just tried to keep up." "No," Grace interjected. "We changed each other. That's how God works. Through relationships, through unexpected connections, through the courage to speak and the wisdom to listen." As the sun set on Thomas's career, he reflected on the journey. From a successful but disconnected businessman to a leader who understood that true wealth was measured in lives transformed. All because a little girl had the courage to cover his mouth and whisper a warning. The next morning, Thomas woke early, as was his habit. He went to his study and opened his Bible, landing on Proverbs 11, verse 25. "A generous person will prosper. Whoever refreshes others will be refreshed." He smiled, thinking of Grace, Dorothy, and all the lives that had been touched by that single moment of courage 10 years ago. Then he noticed something else, a new note Grace had left for him the night before. "Mr. Whitfield, thank you for teaching me that courage isn't a one-time act, but a daily choice. That faith isn't just belief, but action. And that true success is measured not in what we achieve, but in who we lift up along the way. You'll always be the man who listened when it mattered most. With love and gratitude, Grace. Thomas held the note close, offering a prayer of thanksgiving. He had built a business empire, but more importantly, he had learned that the kingdom of God often arrives in the form of an 8-year-old girl with the courage to speak truth to power. And that, he knew, was the greatest success of all.